Hello and welcome, dear students. We are in the third section of this four-part lecture series on John Steinbeck's novella, The Pearl. This section is called Mimicry and Mockery. And what we will be doing in this section is that we will be trying to understand Homi Bhabha's theory of mimicry to give us a better idea of what happens to Kino and his family and perhaps why it happens. Now, when the novella begins, Kino is like the prelapsarian Adam in the Garden of Eden. Prelapsarian here means before the fall, that is, before they sinned against God. So, that is what the word prelapsarian means. Kino is like the prelapsarian Adam in the Garden of Eden. And what you see at the beginning of the novella is that Kino is content with who he is and what he has, because he knows where he belongs and he feels secure in his identity as a Mexican Indian of La Paz. So you could say that Kino is more than just the biblical Adam, that Kino is in effect the God of his universe. For like the God of the book of Genesis, that's what the book of Genesis tells us, that he looked on at his creation each day and said it was good. Similarly, Kino echoes the same kind of sentiment when he looks at his family, which is his creation, at the very start of the novella, and thinks to himself, it was very good. Now, it is not long before the Paul transforms Kino and his life. Once he finds the Paul of the world, it starts his slow movement away from his wife, his brother, and his clan, and away from them, and he moves in the direction of colonized natives, like the servant, the doctor's servant, who has almost largely submitted to colonial domination. So if you look at Kino's, immediate and abiding aspirations, because this is what he says he wants to do as soon as he's able to sell the pole. And these are the dreams, these are the desires that remain with him almost until the very end. He doesn't quite give up on those desires, and these desires, these aspirations reveal his deep-seated insecurities as a colonized man. This is what I'm hoping to help you to understand through this particular video. So not only do they do that, they reveal his deep-seated insecurities as a colonized man, but they also put him at odds, with the life that he and his people had been living until then. So what are these aspirations and why are they a problem is what we need to understand. Now, Kino says that he will buy a rifle, he will get married in church, and he will send his son to school. Now, if you take these three things together, you could say that what Kino wants then is to westernize or Europeanize himself. And if you look at it, if you think about it, each of these three desires stand in opposition to his culture. Because for the Mexican Indian community of La Paz, they have never felt the need for these things. The rifle is symbolic of violence, and I would like to remind you here that whether it was intentional or not, you will remember that that is exactly how Coetito dies. He's shot by a bullet from a rifle. I don't think that that is a coincidence, because if he had to die, Steinbeck could have chosen other means. So you can make that kind of connection between the desire for the rifle and the irony that it is the rifle that becomes the cause of Coetito's death. The church marriage represents an avowal of Christianity, which is the colonizer's religion. So these are the colonized natives. They have their own, they had for the longest time their own practices of religious practices, but they adopt Christianity after their colonization. And the school education that he wants for his son uh, represents an induction into a foreign knowledge system characterized by a dependency on the written word. Now, if you remember the very first video where we had spoken about the community of La Paz, one of the things that I had mentioned there was that the Mexican Indians, they are mostly an oral culture. Writing is not something that is a part of their culture. So, dispensing education through the written word, this is something that is a distinctive characteristic of the white man, of their education system, not of native populations. So now Kino does not realize, he does not see, and I'm quoting Homi Bhabha here, that Christianity at the the way that it came in to colonize people through colonization was an evangelical system of mission education conducted uncompromisingly in English. That is one thing, and it also signifies, according to Bhabha, a form of social control, because as I pointed out in the previous video, the colonizer tries to make the colonized people forget their own culture. And one part, a very important part of culture, is religion, to kind of wipe out your belief systems and replace them with their religion, in the kind of the subtext of which is that, our religion is any day better than yours. Now, so if you look at the priest reminds the Paul divers. This is what Kino and his brother, when they're talking to each other, they mention this, that the priest reminds them in his sermons every year. Every year he makes this sermon where he reminds them about this agent who had cheated, their ancestors. They taken the pearls and run away. They had actually hired him to get a fair price for the pearls, but he cheated them. And the priest uses that episode to continually remind Kino and his people of what happens when you try, as that's how he presents it, what happens when you try to rise above your station in life. So what you see there is how fear and doubt are used as the weapons of control, because the priest reminds the natives that in true Christian spirit, that Christianity tells you that you should remain content with where you are. You should not have too many desires and ambitions. So in other words, they should remain content with their oppressed status, just like their grandfathers and their great grandfathers had done for 400 years. Since, and this I'm quoting from the novella, since first the strangers came with argument and authority and gunpowder to back up both. Now this is a very important line when you're reading the Pearl from a post-colonial perspective, that these strangers, the strangers who came, are the white men. So when they came to conquer, to colonize the Mexican Indians, who are the original inhabitants of the land, they came with argument and authority. They tried to, convince the colonized people that they were there in their best interests, etc., etc. But they also came with gunpowder to back up both. That is, in case the native people did not accept their arguments and their reasons for why they were there, then they had violence. The gunpowder here symbolizes violence. They had violence to back it up. So if you don't listen to me when I tell you, then I'll just take out my gun and that will speak for itself. So Kino forgets that as pearl divers and as fisher folk, his people have never had need for these things, either rifles or church weddings or even formal education. Now, Kino, to give him the benefit of the doubt, wants to liberate his community from the oppressive clutches of the white man. And he seems to really believe that once he's able to sell the pearl, once he's able to send his son to school, and Koetito will learn to read, education and all of these things will empower his community. But there is a problem with these things. And the central paradox here is that wanting to fight the white man entails becoming the white man to a greater or a lesser degree, which consequently entails forgetting what it is to be a brown man to a corresponding degree. So if you want to fight the white man, you have to become like the white man to whatever degree. And the more you become like a white man, at the same time, you're becoming less of a brown man. That is, you're losing your original identity. You cannot, so this is also what has happened, let's say, in India, where even after colonization, the traces of the colonial legacies are still with us. The white man is not ruling us anymore, but the white man's language, the white man's customs, and many other traces, like I said, are still here. They have not been completely wiped out. So the pearl produces a crisis of identity which is caused by colonization, because now that Kino finds the pearl, and now that there is hope that they will have money to do all the things that Kino said he wants to do. They have money to buy a rifle. They will have money to, pay the priest to get them married in church. He'll have money to send his son to school, to buy the things that, money can buy and fulfill all his dreams. But he doesn't realize that it puts him in a kind of ambiguous position, because these dreams are, not the dreams of the people of his community. And somewhere Kino does not seem to be aware of how the pearl has caused this or produced this crisis of identity. So, for example, all right, if just to convince you, for example, this is the question we can ask: why does he forget that his race has never sought the kind of legitimization of a man-woman relationship through the formal rituals of Christianity? Joanna and Kino have been living together as man and wife. They have a child. They have not been, they have not been legally married in any modern sense of the term, neither in a church or anywhere else. So for the people of Mexican Indians of La Paz, there is no problem with Kino and Joanna, living together as husband and wife, having a child. They don't need these things. But Kino suddenly feels the need, after after having a child, suddenly he feels the need to get married in a church. Doesn't really make sense. So now if you take, for example, his desire to send his son to school, that can also be seen as another way of submitting to the colonial agenda. Why do I say that? Because the education that his son will get will be a Western one. He says, I will send my son to school and my son will learn to read, but the education that he gets will be related to the white people. He will The knowledge that he gains will pertain to the Western people, and it will be disseminated in the language of the colonizer. Obviously, the knowledge is not going to come in the native language. Again, this is the same thing that had happened to us as Indians, where the medium of instruction, by and large, this started during the time of colonization, was through the English language, which we are continuing till now. And most of the knowledge that we study, we have been studying, which you are also studying, almost all of it relates to the West. Your theories in sociology, Freud, and whichever other psychologists that you study, the whole theory of psychoanalysis, the whole theory of child development, in psychology, the whole theory of society, groups, etc., etc. Somewhere maybe a little bit you will be introduced to an Indian perspective or an Indian context. But by and large, this knowledge is produced in the West, and it comes to us in the language of mostly English, which is the language of the white man, so to speak. So, and Kino's desire to send his son to school almost implies that his community either has no knowledge, or whatever knowledge they have is not worth anything. Now, this is also very ironic if you think about it, because when it comes to the scorpion, as it will come up in the forthcoming slides, when it comes to the scorpion, the doctor is supposed to be the knowledgeable person, but Steinbeck gives us to understand that even though the doctor does not treat Coetito, whatever Juana does, it seems to have worked. So the people, Mexican Indian people, it's not that they don't know anything. They know what they need to know to survive. But somehow Kino seems to feel that, oh, that knowledge is not worth anything. Knowledge is what you get when you go to school. And of course, there is a certain legitimacy to the knowledge that comes from a formal education system, that also the one that's introduced by the white man, just like the relationship, the marriage between him and Joanna becomes more legitimate only when it is blessed by a priest, following the religion of the colonizer. So this is what happens to colonized people. Because of centuries of colonization, some people tend to forget, tend to devalue their own native traditions and cultures, and believe that whatever we have is worth nothing, and you look up to the white man, to the ruler, and think you admire them and you want to imitate them to whatever extent possible. So although Kino's desire to send his son to school comes from faith in the power of education, he genuinely believes that education will liberate his community and his people, but it is still problematic, and that is what I want to help you to understand. Now, again, Franz Fanon was a name that I had introduced to you in the previous presentation. I'm quoting here Fanon, who says that and the post-colonial critics have pointed out the problems with learning the white man's language. And that is a whole, it's a very complex, they're very complex perspectives. I don't want to go into it in this video, but I'll just kind of point out to you what Fanon says, that the Negro wants to speak French because it is the key that can open doors which were still barred to him 50 years ago. And again, if I were to draw parallels with our country, we also want to learn English. A lot of Indians are desperate to learn English because they know that that is the language that can open doors which native languages cannot open. And those of us who know English have an advantage over all those people who do not, because there are so many more doors that are open to us when we know the English language, which was not our native language. It's a language that came to us through colonization. So, Kino awakens to the power of language. He understands the power of language and the power of learning the white man's language, but he does not somehow realize its political implications. Now, again, as Fanon says, every colonized people, in other words, every people in whose soul an inferiority complex has been created by the death and burial of its local cultural originality, finds itself face to face with the language of the civilizing nation, that is, with the culture of the mother country. So that the white man's country is the mother country. The colonized is elevated above his jungle status in proportion to his adoption of the mother country's cultural standards. That is, the colonizers made the colonized people believe that they were some kind of uncivilized, barbaric people, and you can rise above that to the extent that you become like the whites, to the extent that you adopt their cultural standards. Now, those cultural standards could be standards of literature, standards of what religion you practice, the clothes that you wear, the language that you speak, everything. To the extent that you adopt the colonizer's ways, to that extent the colonized native will be less of a jungle man. So Kino, in other words, through his dreams and his aspirations, ironically believes that they will help him and his community to be liberated from the clutches of colonization. But what is actually happening is that he succumbs to the appeal of Europe, and he pays the price for it, just like Adam and Eve did for forgetting their promise to God. So this is a question that we need to ask. If that is a puzzling question, why, Kino is a good man, and the only reason he went looking for the pearl, and the only reason he wanted to, sell it, for everything that he wanted to do, his intentions were always good. They were never evil. They were never meant to harm anybody. But why does this tragedy still happen? So one question that we could ask is that why he's punished? Because he goes away from his community? Another question that comes up is it the pearl's curse on him because he took the pearl out of its original home and enslaved the pearl to himself? He wanted the pearl for himself, like he says at one point. I think I told you in the previous video, the pearl has become my soul. But the pearl was not meant to be his. It is not meant for human beings to sell and make money out of. So is it the pearl's curse on him because he enslaved the pearl to himself, just as he enslaved himself to the white man? And the pearl is the means by which he hopes to become like the white man, because he took the pearl to fulfill his white man dreams. Now, the reason I say that, I pointed out to you why those dreams, I call them white man's dreams, because they are alien to the people of his community, the rifle, the church wedding, the school education, etc., etc. But it is, now many people might say that Kino started dreaming these dreams after he got the pearl. But I think that Steinbeck is suggesting that he had always dreamed the white man's dream. It's just that he voiced it after he found the pearl. It's not that those desires suddenly came to him after he had the pearl. He always had these desires, but he didn't see any point in articulating them because there was no way by which he could make those dreams possible. But now that he has the pearl, and this I'm quoting from the novella, the things Kino's mind had considered in the past and given up as impossible. So he always had these dreams, but he had given up on ever being able to fulfill them. It's only now that he has the pearl that he thinks that yes, maybe I can fulfill these dreams. So let's just look at these dreams again in a little more detail. Okay, and this again, I'm quoting from the novella. Kino dreams. So now he says he wants a rifle, he wants to get married in church, he wants to send his son to school. All of that is so far so good. But in a little more detail, Kino starts detailing his dream. He dreams of having not just any pair of shoes, laced shoes, not just any clothes, white clothes. And I reminded you last time of how when he flees to the mountains, he has to shed his white shirt. Right? All of these are symbolic in the novella. Not a straw hat, which the people of his community mostly wore, maybe because of to protect themselves from the sun, but a hat that's made of black felt, and not just any rifle, a specific rifle, a Winchester carbine, which is an American manufactured and licensed weapon. So now this is the reason why I said that Kino succumbs to the appeal of Europe, and that his dreams actually signify his desire to become like the white man, to westernize or Europeanize himself. Okay, now moving on. He also says he imagines Coetito wearing a blue sailor suit from the United States and a little yachting cap, such as he had seen once when a pleasure boat put out in the estuary. So once he had seen this, some American child wearing a blue sailor suit and a little yachting cap, and that little thing stayed in his memory. And now he says, he imagines his son also wearing the same kind of clothes. So yes, Coetito will get an education, but the education that he gets, Kino imagines him seated at a desk, reading from a book, dressed in a jacket, wearing a shirt with a white collar and a silk tie. Now, these these specifications, and kind of tell you very clearly how they are so very different from what Mexican Indians, the clothes that they would be wearing, and how they would be getting whatever education that they get. So Kino is very specific in his dreams. And now these dreams, as I pointed out to you on this slide, are the dreams of enslavement, not of freedom. And therefore they belie Kino's hope that if he is able to fulfill these dreams after selling the pearl, he will be able to set them all free. Because they're not the dreams of freedom, they're the dreams of enslavement. So now, for example, Joanna, who you can see as the biblical Eve. Okay, and why do I say she's the biblical Eve? In the book of Genesis, you're told that Eve was the one who tempted Adam. So similarly here, Joanna is the one who first says, let's take Coetito to the doctor, which is something that takes everybody by surprise, and it also shows her lack of faith in the collective wisdom and knowledge of their community. And Steinbeck writes, all of these people knew about the scorpion. A scorpion bite was not something new to the Mexican Indians. It had happened before, and they knew how to deal with it. And Joanna does finally go back to the ancient healing methods of her community, but only after the doctor refuses to treat the baby. And as I said to you before, Steinbeck gives us to understand that the ancient way actually worked. This is what he says: it was as good a remedy as any, and probably better than the doctor could have done. But the remedy lacked his authority because it was simple and didn't cost anything. So what we see is that because of colonization, Kino and Joanna seem to always be in a state of fear and uncertainty. And this is after they get the pearl. Before that, there did not seem to be any confusion because he did not have these desires. But now they are in a state of confusion and doubt as they go along. And Steinbeck writes at one point, Joanna prayed to God, that is a Christian God with a capital G, or gods, with a it's interesting that one God is with the capital capitalized, and the other one is not, and one is singular and the other is plural, because Christianity is a monotheistic religion and believes in the idea of one God, and the God of Christianity is supposed to be more important, like the one true God. That's why with the capital G. And other religions who have multiple gods, polytheistic religions, are not considered, taken seriously by a Christian, when you look at them from a Christian perspective. So she prays to God, the Christian God, or the gods of her, of her tribe, or both, unsure of which God will answer her prayers. So it shows you again that they are neither here nor there. So now I want to relate this to Homi Bhabha's theory of mimicry. And this was an idea that he explained in his essay of Mimicry and Man, the Ambivalence of Colonial Discourse. Now, it's a very complex theory. I am trying to simplify it for your sake, and I'm taking a very, very small part of it uh, to relate it to what happens in the poll. Bhabha said that mimicry is one of the most elusive and effective strategies of colonial power. So post-colonial theorists have tried to understand how is it that the colonizers were able to retain their power over the colonized people for centuries. And so a physical force, the gunpowder and having guns was not enough to answer how that happened. So Bhabha came up with the idea of mimicry. Okay, and he said that it represents the colonizer's desire to create the colonized other as almost the same but not quite. So the colonizer wants the colonized to become like itself, but not 100%. Almost, but not quite. Now, Bhabha also said that mimicry can be counterproductive, can kind of destroy the colonizer's objective if the colonized subject can convert mimicry into mockery. Now, just to, like I said, simplify this and explain it at a kind of in a rather simplistic manner. Let's say you have a stand-up comic who is imitating, a politician or maybe even the prime minister or some celebrity. So one way of imitating is just imitating as is. And everybody laughs because of how good your imitation is, of how much you approximate the character that you are imitating. But you can also imitate with mockery, which means that there's a certain amount of critical awareness in that imitation. You're imitating, but you're not really imitating with admiration and a genuine desire to be like the person that you're imitating. If anything, you're critical of that person. So if you can convert the mimicry into mockery, that is, you can imitate the person but keep your distance at the same time, then your mimicry becomes a menace. It becomes something dangerous to the colonizer. So that is what Bhabha called the ambivalence of mimicry. And he said that that is a state of being almost the same but not white. So almost the same but not quite, almost white but not quite white, not as white as the white man. So Kino shows that he is aware of this dilemma, not in a very kind of conscious manner, but somewhere he is aware that he's stuck in a very odd place when he tells when he asks his brother, but how can we know? When his brother asks him, when you go to sell the pearl at the capital, how will you know whether it's a fair price, whoever you go to sell it to? And he says that, but how can we know? We are here and not there. And that is, in a sense, the crux of Kino's problem once he finds the pearl, that he was where he was and he was happy where he was secure, he felt a sense of belonging, he was content. But the minute he gets the pearl and he realizes that, these repressed dreams of his can now be fulfilled, that creates more problems for him than he is aware of. And so he seems to be moving ahead, but he is actually stuck in an in-between space where he's neither here nor there. Neither is he a fully Mexican Indian man like he was at the start, neither is he a white man like he hopes to be. So if Kino's mimicry becomes a danger or a menace, it becomes only a danger or menace for himself, not for the colonizers. Kino ends up becoming a threat to himself. So I hope that this, I know it must have been a little challenging and difficult for you because of the post-colonial theory, but the whole point of this video was to take the discussions that we had in class to another level and to challenge you. And even if you found it a little difficult, you have the video that you can go over any number of times, and I'm sure that once you do that, you will be able to find it. It will kind of resonate with you. You will understand what happens to Kino a little better than you did in the beginning, right? So thank you very much for your attention, and I will see you in the next video, which will be the fourth and final video, in which we will be discussing the end of the novella from the point that Kino flees to the mountains with Joanna and Coitito, and till the time that the novella ends when they come back and throw the pearl back into the sea. So thank you once again.